So my name is Amy Kim, and I am from Red Deer, Alberta. And some of the experiences I have been through in my life as an autistic person, I struggle sometimes with verbal communication, especially, and have found that writing is the best way to get my thoughts and ideas across to other people. The message in my piece is important to me because I hope it really pushes service providers and clinicians to see that the term high functioning autism is really not an ideal term. I feel like its usage masks a lot of the struggles autistic people experience on a daily basis. I hope the Canadian Journal of Autism Equity can maybe bring to light that there are a lot of autistic women out there who are struggling to find the appropriate support and resources needed to be able to reach their fullest potential. And there really is a large gap between the term high functioning and what it's like to be an autistic person out in the real world. And I'm hoping the journal will be a catalyst for bringing about some change and making sure that autistic voices are heard. No, I really want the journal to reach as wide of an audience as possible, but I really want a lot of it to be directed at service providers and people that are going to be providing, I don't know, diagnostic or whatever clinical services, because I've tried looking everywhere around here and there's nothing. Just nothing. It's very frustrating. Yeah, and I just hate to think that there's a lot of people out there just not really knowing what to do. Some of it maybe towards parents as well, because I feel like if my parents knew a lot of this stuff when I was growing up, it would have helped. They did the best that they could with the information they had, but
Okay, my name is Gerald Beaulieu, and I'm originally from Welland, Ontario, Canada. And in 1988, I moved to Prince Edward Island, where I now reside. One of the big thing is for me is the community building. So working with other people who are autistic across the country, their points of views, their experiences, because I live in the smallest province of the country. It's like a small Ontario town like St. Catharines. So it's and being late diagnosed, it's unfamiliar territory. So it's a chance to learn, to contribute, and to pursue the goals of the journal, which is equitable position for autism. Well, it's a means of communication. It's about the sharing of ideas, experiences, and an increasing of knowledge. It, it's a topic that not a lot of people know about. I make reference to the fact in my article that probably the most well-known autistic people are fictional characters. So it's a chance for other people to actually find out who we are. The piece I did was I did a review of a body of work I did about 15 years ago to see what kind of autistic traits were very much present. It was an autobiographical piece of work that I normally do. I'm more usually focused on social commentary, so wider kind of political things. But this was a very autobiographical work, and I just looked at what its meaning was now through an autistic lens, and the fact that it was completely missed, and the work didn't succeed in the way I had hoped, because of course, there wasn't the context for people to really appreciate what it was I was saying. Hopefully, as many people as possible. It is about social equity, and it's coming from an autistic lens, but social equity is very much a thing that we're expanding upon in every possible aspect these days, whether it's racial equity, whether it's Aboriginal equity. So hopefully there's a very wide cross section of people who are going to get some insight from this, and obviously the people who would be setting some kind of policy as we work to a national strategy. Probably bigger, probably completely out of my hands. Um, and probably, hopefully, it becomes a landmark publication in terms of, establishing kind of a real autistic culture, because that's what I see as emerging. Of course, autism has been around forever, but its awareness, our understanding of it, it's all relatively new. So it's a chance to build that culture and build that community.
My name is Ryan Collis. I'm a PhD student at York University, and I live in Ajax, Ontario. Getting autistic voices out is very important to me. It's part of what I research and what I study is how we can get autistic people inclusion to be a more organic thing. How do we make it so that it's not something we have to actively do, but something that simply is done? And part of that is getting autistic voices out into the world so people can hear our thoughts, see our ideas, and understand who and what we are. I'm very excited to be a part of this. Let's make it personally. It gives me an opportunity that I haven't had before to collaborate with other autistic thinkers, writers, artists. Most of my work is done solo or with a few peer editing here and there. But this is my first opportunity to work with autistic people, editing autistic people's work, seeing autistic people doing artistic and creative endeavors, and participating in that as a larger group, as opposed to one-on-ones here and there and one-offs. Sure. So the piece I published, I had trouble figuring out where to start. So I talked to one of the people I collaborate with, and her idea was to do sort of the start of my journey, where I got into what I do, what I study. And so I wrote about my undergraduate thesis, where I first started engaging with autistic people on Twitter, time interacting with a larger autistic community, and hearing what they were saying, hearing what they were happy or unhappy about, and looking into it. And so it's sort of my journey from being an individual autistic person to joining, at least on the fringes of the larger autistic community. I mean, I wrote the piece as sort of an intro to what's going on for three different groups. I assume autistic people who read it would read it and say, yeah, that's pretty much our experience as well. Non-autistic people would read it and say, gee, that doesn't make a lot of sense the way these policies are made. And policymakers will read it and say, gee, we're not doing things the right way. I'm sure at least two of those are pie in the sky type hope dreams, but I'm hoping that's the long-term result of what we're doing, is that people look at it and say, gee, the way we're doing things now isn't a good way of doing things. We need to change the way we think about autism, the way we make policy for people, and open a larger conversation on that. 5 years from now, I would like to think that we're successful in creating a large stable of autistic creators. And so for every issue, there's competition for space, that we have autistic people participating because they know that their voice will be heard. We have a large creative group trying to get their voice out there, because that means there are people engaged. That means there are people who see us as a method of getting their voice heard. It means that people are reading the journal and hearing those voices. And so I'm hoping in 5 years we're very, very busy, because there's so much both need for the voices we're boosting, and desire to hear the things that we are producing, we are saying.
My name is Rebecca Kinsinger, and I am based out of Kelowna in British Columbia. Myself, CJAE is an opportunity for autistic and First Voices to be heard in an equal and effective platform where I believe the most change can come from. Policymakers, researchers, and service providers also have an opportunity to glean from autistic people what matters to them most and how equity and disability rights can be achieved in Canada. I hope that the journal succeeds in its vision and grows to hold the words of autistic people across Canada in all its diversity. The journal means that First Voices can have a place other than social media to talk about important issues that face autistic people in Canada, as they hope to affect change with their voice. The journal will be a place of conversation on how inclusion can grow and where equity really begins. I'm really excited. My article discusses the medical model of disability and its use in Canada. I discuss the drawbacks of using such a model so singularly in policy and practice. I also discuss the autistic and disabled community's preference of using a social model of disability instead. While the social model of disability offers much that a medical model of disability cannot, there is a model of disability that includes both what a medical and social model can, and goes above this even. Furthermore, I talk in the article about this model of disability that the World Health organization created in 2001 called the International Classification of Functioning. I suggest that this alternative model is a solution to Canada taking a more unified approach to the autism community's needs. It would be fantastic if all Canadians read the journal because there is much to learn from autistic Canadians. But ideally, if policymakers and service providers were aware of the Canadian Journal of Autism Equity, this would be a great step forward in their understanding of the issues and passions that are important to autistic Canadians. In addition, the journal is primarily written by first voice autistic people, so it is entirely appropriate that autistic people would enjoy reading it. I know I will enjoy reading it. Going strong, I see this journal going strong and still including a diverse amount of voices from the autistic community.
Okay, my name is Terry Robson. I currently live in London, Ontario. I hope to actually make a difference, make more of a difference than I already have in the lives of people with autism spectrum disorders. For me, I've sort of associated myself with somebody with Asperger's syndrome because when I was diagnosed, it was when they first put Asperger's syndrome in the DSM. So I still always refer to it as Asperger's syndrome, even though I know for a lot of people, they don't do that anymore. But I just want to help them on their journey to understanding and acceptance of who they are, because it's a tough road to go down by yourself. And once you realize that there's more than one of you out there, it's kind of like, oh, big relief. I can handle it better now because I'm not the only one in this strange world that I try to inhabit. Is a place to give ourselves a voice. When I do my presentations, I get to give a voice to those thousands of people who can't for one reason or another. So the journal is an opportunity for a lot of those people who couldn't stand up in front of a crowd and talk about what it's like to have an autism spectrum disorder. So it's an opportunity for people who paint, who maybe put their words to song, who maybe can't talk in front of other people, to just put their feelings about what this life is like for them, to put it out there for people to hear and to see and go, you know what? They're just like us. They're just a little bit different. So it's an opportunity for everybody to have their voice heard, regardless of the medium in which they want to do it. Actually, I've written a series of poems. It's entitled, Are We Equal? And a thought would come into my head and I would sit down and less than 5 minutes later, I would have a poem. So some of them are about equity. Some are about maybe the loneliness that we live with this life. Some are about the journey that we travel, but essentially it comes down to, even though we're different, we're the same. I think everybody can benefit from it, be it from top of the government on down to other people on the spectrum, to mums and dads and brothers and sisters. You know, get our government reading it, get our teachers reading it, get the educational assistants reading it, get the psychiatrists, the psychiatric nurses, anybody who works with people on the spectrum, their caregivers, because so many people understand so little about the autism spectrum disorders. Like, I love giving presentations because you get to see the light come on in everybody's face. And it's even better than just one person, right? It's like a light for everybody. And ultimately for me, it's about becoming more aware, more understanding. And with that awareness and understanding comes acceptance. So I think everybody who reads this journal will come to that understanding, and then they will become more accepting of who we are. Because after all, that's all any of us want, is just to be accepted for being who we are as people. Ultimately, I think I'd like it to be more than twice a year. You know, like even if we only do it every 2 months, I'd like it to be something that, you know, would be really cool is if it was not just a national magazine, like an eMag, but an international one, where we get information, reports, statistics, what's the word I want? Research, there we go, that's the word I want. From other countries saying what has worked for them, what doesn't work for them, what can we do to help other people? Like, let's put more tools into this toolbox that we're starting with the group of 9 of us, so that we can draw from these tools and other people can use this toolbox with us and say, yeah, that works for us, give it a try. If not, we have this other tool over here that you can use. So I want it to be something that everybody can, like I said, let's call it a toolbox, and everybody can reach in and take out what they need. And if they find something, a new tool that works, then put it in so that we can share it with everybody else. And it makes it a bigger voice, better voice if we have better tools.
My name is Mackenzie Salt. I have a PhD in cognitive science of language at McMaster University, and I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at McMaster University with the McMaster University Autism Research Team. I'd like to build bridges with this journal. There's a lot of things the research community can learn from the autism community, and I think vice versa as well. And I really want to make sure that autistic voices are heard in research. The journal to me means taking a community whose voice has not always been heard, especially by institutional voices in research and policy, and really putting those voices to the forefront. So I've written a quasi-editorial piece about how in research, researchers tend to focus on the parent perspective when looking at the autism community, and my piece sort of makes the case that while the parent perspective is useful and is useful for certain types of research, you cannot take the parent perspective as the perspective of the entire autism community, and there really needs to be more engagement with actual autistic people. I would hope to see this journal with a larger editorial board, more voices, more pieces, maybe more frequent issues, but one that is able to address the issues of the day, not just standard, not just typical autism causes, but also things that are going on in the autism community today. Tomorrow, what are we looking towards? What are we moving towards? So a good source for voices of the Canadian autistic community to be heard, not just in reference to what people have gone through in the past, but also what they're going through today and what they see themselves as possibly going through in the future. Well, I'm hoping that a lot of people read this journal, especially researchers, those who want to interface and engage with the autism community. I want politicians, policymakers, service providers. I think anyone who works with the autistic community should read this journal.
My name is Cameron Winter. I'm a PhD student at the University of Guelph. I'm a member of the Canadian Journal of Autism Equity's Editorial Board. I'm originally from Lindsay, Ontario, now a part of the city of Kawartha Lakes. I'm 30 years old now. I was diagnosed with autism, or at the time Asperger's syndrome, when I was in the first grade. I was re-diagnosed on entering adulthood with a non-verbal learning disability, which, as near as I can tell, was psychiatrists speak for, you're not like any of the other autistics I've interacted with, but there's definitely something off with you. I've continued to identify as autistic simply because that's what I was first diagnosed as, and it's what I think of myself as. I've been involved in a lot of personal advocacy in the past, both for myself and for friends who are on the spectrum, but this is the first time that I've been involved in a professional capacity. I'm in the final year of my PhD at Guelph, where I'm writing on colonial warfare, doing a comparative study of the American war against the Lakota and Cheyenne to the British war against the Zulu, looking for similarities in how bigotry undermined both plans of campaign. I'm hoping that being a part of this journal will give me the opportunity to do some advocacy work in, as I previously touched on, a more professional capacity than I have in the past. Both myself and a number of my friends have experienced a certain amount of discrimination in the past because of who we are and what we are, and that's always bothered me, but I've never been in a position to do anything about it in anything beyond a personal capacity, complaining to the union at work about how I was being treated, walking friends through how to do the same when they ran into difficulty at their jobs or at their schools. And I'm hoping that being a part of this journal will give me the opportunity to introduce the wider public to who the autistic community is, or at least to who my part of it is, and in spreading that knowledge, hopefully make it easier for other people on the spectrum to avoid going through some of the drama that I and my friends have gotten to enjoy in the past. So for my article for the introductory issue of the journal, I've tried to stay more or less in my wheelhouse as a historian. Often I've found that when trying to explain autism to people, people will reach for examples of historical figures that they believe were on the spectrum. Isaac Newton's a common choice, Albert Einstein is another. And while there's certainly advantage to doing that, and it can make a very effective shorthand when trying to communicate with people, and it can also be important for communicating the fact that autism has been around for a long time, we suspect, and that it's not something new. I've always found that there are problems in how that topic is approached and in how it's talked about. I've found issues in both who we talk about and how we talk about them. And so in my article, I've picked a figure, a historical figure that I strongly suspect was on the spectrum, who in fact I would suggest there is better evidence that he was on the spectrum than there is for the likes of Einstein or Newton or some of the other common choices that we've picked. And I've looked at why he doesn't come up in the discourse and why the ways he doesn't come up in the discourse are a little bit troubling to me.